She thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I hadn't been for 3 nights straight. I heard the click of her phone, then the quiet buzz of a message, then another, then that stifled giggle, the one she used to have with me, back when I mattered. I should have stayed in bed. Should have turned over, closed my eyes, and pretended like always. But I got up. I didn't plan to hide. It just happened. I was walking down the hallway when I saw the light under the guest room door. I pressed my back to the wall. I stood there. She didn't hear me. She didn't care. Her voice was soft. Low. Giddy. Yeah, he bought it. Completely. Like always. Silence. A pause. Then her again. He's got no clue. You could come over right now, and he'd probably thank you for fixing the sink. The voice on the other end laughed. Deep. Confident. Familiar. And that's when my heart dropped. Because I knew that laugh. It belonged to someone I used to trust. Someone I once called family. My feet moved on their own. I went into the closet, sat down on the floor behind a row of coats, and just listened. Like a coward. Like a ghost in my own house. She talked for 37 minutes. I counted. She talked about me. My habits. My body. My insecurities. She told him I cry in my sleep sometimes. Said I once apologized for dreaming I yelled at her. They laughed at that too. She said she keeps me around because I'm useful. Because I always say yes. Because I'd rather avoid a fight than admit she's lying. I stayed there until the call ended. Until I heard the door creak shut and her footsteps go quiet. Then I sat in the dark for another hour, staring at the inside of a shoe box, wondering how long I'd been the joke. No confrontation. No screaming. No slammed doors. Just a cold, hollow understanding that something had snapped. Not in her, but in me. The next morning, I made her coffee. She smiled. I smiled back. And when she went into the shower, I opened her phone and sent a message. Not to him, to me. I forwarded the voice message. Then deleted it from her history. I didn't play it again. I didn't need to. I'd already memorized every word. That night, while she slept beside me like nothing had happened, I started packing. Just one bag. Just the essentials. She didn't wake up. She never does. I left a note on the fridge. Don't worry about the sink. It was never broken. Then I walked out the door. No plan. No destination. No more pretending. That was 3 days ago. And what happened after I left is somehow even worse. I stayed in a motel just off the highway. One of those places where the air conditioner hums like it's dying and the vending machine eats your dollar. I chose it because no one would look for me there. She didn't call. Not that day, not the next. The silence should have felt like freedom. It didn't. It felt like I never existed in the first place. I spent hours just lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process how easy it had been for her to erase me from her world, while I spent years thinking I was part of her foundation. Every hour brought a new wave of shame. Shame for not leaving sooner. Shame for still loving her in fragments. Shame for picturing her with him and wondering if she looked happier. On the second night, I opened my phone and played the forwarded audio message. I told myself I wouldn't, but it was there, a Pandora's box I couldn't ignore. Hearing her voice like that again, soft, flirty, so familiar yet so distant, talking about me like I was a dog too stupid to realize he was being walked in circles, it cracked something I didn't even know was still whole. I deleted it. Not to protect her. To protect myself. Because if I heard it again, I wouldn't be able to stop. The next morning, I went back to the house. Not to talk to her. Not to take her back. I told myself I just needed to grab a few more things. My watch, some files, the dog's leash. But the truth was uglier. I went because I still hoped she'd be sorry. I wanted to see it on her face. I wanted an apology, even a fake one, just to feel like I'd mattered, even for a second. I walked in through the garage. Her car wasn't there. I stepped into the kitchen, half expecting the smell of her coffee, the sound of her slippers on the tile, some sign that she'd noticed I was gone. Nothing. The silence was total. But the fridge was different. My note, the one I'd left 3 days ago, was gone. Not torn. Not crumpled. Just missing. In its place, magnet to the door, was something else. A photo. Of me. Not from our wedding. Not from a vacation. From last winter, sitting on the couch, blanket up to my chest, holding a mug of tea and staring at the TV like a zombie. I hadn't even known she took it. On the back, written in sharp black marker, it said, "You always looked better quiet." I dropped it. Not out of shock. Out of nausea. I don't know why, but that shook me more than the phone call. The realization that she wasn't just indifferent, she was mocking me. cataloging my weakness like it was part of her private collection. It wasn't just betrayal. It was cruelty. That's when the doorbell rang. I froze. Completely. My hand was still on the photo on the floor. I didn't move for 10, maybe 15 seconds. Then it rang again, 2 short buzzes this time. I walked to the door, heart racing, no idea who I expected to see. It wasn't her. It wasn't him. It was a teenage girl, maybe 17, dark hoodie, nervous eyes. She looked up at me and said, "Are you Mr. Galloway?" I nodded, even though my mouth was too dry to speak. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. No envelope, just crumpled and smoothed again. She handed it to me and said, "She said you'd want this." Before I could ask anything, who she was, what she meant, who she was, the girl had already turned and walked down the street, disappearing behind a corner like she was never there. I shut the door, locked it, sat down on the living room floor, and unfolded the paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a printed bank transfer receipt. A large sum of money, $14,600, had been wired from our joint savings account to a name I didn't recognize. I checked the timestamp. 2 days ago, while I was gone, while I was sitting in a motel room with a buzzing air conditioner, trying to remember what peace felt like. She was moving money into someone else's hands. And right there, for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't just betrayed. I was being replaced. Who the hell was the girl? Who was the money for? Why was she still playing games after I'd already left? Nothing made sense, but the one thing I knew was that I couldn't walk away quietly anymore. I sat on the living room floor for a long time, the printed bank receipt still in my hand. I kept rereading the name of the person who received the transfer. Ivory Calhoun. Never heard of her. Never seen the name before in our friend circles, work contacts, or even her family tree. It didn't feel random. And $14,600? That wasn't a slip. That wasn't an accident. That was surgical. My first thought was that it might be one of her aliases. Talia worked in accounting. She knew how to make things disappear. But something about the handwriting on the photo, the delivery girl, the timing, it all felt calculated. Like someone wanted me to follow the trail. So I did. I looked up the bank. Local. I drove across town to the branch, hoping I could bluff my way into more information, pretending to be her husband still managing the account. But of course, the teller wouldn't tell me anything beyond the obvious. The money had cleared, and it was a digital transfer, not something they could unsee. I walked out and sat in my car in the parking lot, chewing on my lip until it bled. Then I opened my phone and tried something desperate. I searched Ivory Calhoun in Facebook. Nothing came up at first. But then, after scrolling deeper, I found a tagged photo in a local community group, a blurry snapshot from a charity car wash. There she was, young, maybe mid-20s, blonde braids, denim shorts, and in the corner of the picture, almost cropped out completely, was my wife. Talia was standing next to her, bent over a donation table, wearing the exact same jacket she claimed belonged to someone else just a week ago. I stared at that photo until my vision blurred. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. There was another life I hadn't known about. A side of her that was operating in a different ecosystem. Cash, aliases, teenage couriers at my front door. And suddenly, that note on the fridge, "You always looked better quiet," took on a whole new meaning. Not just cruelty. A warning. I didn't know who Ivory was to her, but I was willing to bet she wasn't just a friend. I tracked down the charity. Just a tiny local group, one of those scrappy, under-the-radar setups. Their website looked like it hadn't been updated since 2008. But their events page listed a coordinator, someone who handled volunteer signups and fund disbursements. Her name? Ivory Calhoun. She wasn't just a side character. She was running the whole show. And somehow, my wife was tangled up in it. I went home. My real home. I don't know why. I just needed to sit in a space I understood. The motel room was too hollow, too impersonal. The house, even if she poisoned it, still had the echoes of the life I thought I had. It was around 8 p.m. when I heard the key in the front door. She hadn't been home in days. I thought maybe she was avoiding me. Maybe she assumed I'd come back and wanted to stay clear. But no. She walked in like she'd never left. Dropped her bag on the floor. Took off her shoes. Went straight to the kitchen and opened the fridge. Like I hadn't walked out. Like nothing was broken. I stood in the hallway, watching. She turned around slowly. Saw me. Blinked once. "Oh, you're here," she said, like I was some plumber she forgot she'd called. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the bank slip and shove it in her face. Ask her who Ivory was. Ask her what game she thought she was playing with my life, my heart, my money. But I didn't. Because something about the way she looked at me, not with guilt, but with expectation, made me pause. Like she already knew I'd found out. Like she'd planned for it. "What's wrong?" she asked, cool as ever, sipping from a water bottle she'd left behind days ago. I swallowed hard. And I said the only thing I could think to say. "Who is she?" She smiled. Actually smiled. Then said, "You're late. I thought you'd find out yesterday." Before I could respond, she walked past me and disappeared into the bedroom. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't dealing with someone who just stopped loving me. I was dealing with someone who had turned my entire life into a stage. And I'd been the punchline of a performance I never auditioned for. She didn't slam the bedroom door. She didn't lock it. She didn't shout anything from the other side. She just vanished into the dark like I wasn't standing there with my hands trembling. For a few minutes, I stood in the hallway frozen, trying to piece together what kind of person expects to be confronted about a secret life and is smug about it. Eventually, I walked into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, clutching the folded receipt in my hand like it was a lifeline. I stared at the photo she'd left on the fridge, the one of me curled up on the couch looking half dead, and suddenly I understood. She wanted me to see it. She was orchestrating something, leaving me breadcrumbs like a twisted scavenger hunt. This wasn't a careless affair. It was a strategy. I knew I wouldn't sleep, so I started looking. At first, it was just pacing, touching familiar objects with unfamiliar thoughts. The vase she once said was from her grandmother. Was it? The painting above the stairs she claimed she bought from a street artist. Did she? The boxes in the hallway closet labeled winter scarves that I'd never seen her wear once. Then I opened the office door. Talia's office had always been off limits. Not locked, but emotionally locked. She called it her thinking space. Said she used it for spreadsheets and freelance bookkeeping work, claimed she needed solitude. And I, being the idiot who always respected her space more than my own sanity, never questioned it. Until now. Inside, it looked like I expected. Clean, cold, minimalist. Nothing personal. No family photos, no post-it notes. A sterile desk with a laptop, a drawer unit, and a single-frame certificate for a QuickBooks training course. I sat down in her chair. Turned on the laptop. Password protected. No surprise there. I didn't try to guess. I went for the drawers. The first two were empty except for some pins and unused notepads. But the bottom drawer stuck. Not locked, just jammed like something had shifted behind it. I tugged harder, until it jolted free. Inside was a manila folder, thick with printouts and glossy brochures. The first thing I saw was my name. Not handwritten. Typed. A document titled Beneficiary Authorization, Alternate Executor Agreement. It made my mouth go dry. At first glance, it looked like a legal form. Something to do with trusts. But the deeper I read, the stranger it became. The form named me as the alternate executor of a fund I'd never heard of. But the primary executor? Ivory Calhoun. And the source of the funds? A trust connected to something called Clear Path Initiatives, with a mailing address in another state. I kept flipping through the stack. There were emails, printed out and heavily highlighted. One from Ivory to Talia. If anything goes wrong, he'll cover the blowback. Just keep him close until after disbursement. Another one. You'll need to move the last chunk by Friday. If he asks questions, do your quiet routine. Works every time. And then this, circled in red ink. He doesn't need to understand it. He just needs to be it. You know how to handle him. I sat there, completely still. It was all a script. I wasn't a husband. I was a prop in some financial play she was staging with a woman I'd never met. A woman I now suspected wasn't just some charity face, but someone who moved money for people like Talia. Everything suddenly looked different. The extra toothbrush. The guest room lights. The charger. The smirks. The call. It wasn't an affair of the heart, it was logistics. I was the liability insurance. She kept me around for the same reason people leave their names on utilities in an old apartment, to keep the lights on while they build something in the dark. I heard her come down the stairs. Barefoot. Calm. She stepped into the office like she'd expected me to find it all eventually. And the worst part? She didn't flinch. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, and said one sentence. You weren't supposed to open that until I was gone. She didn't deny it. She didn't try to explain. She didn't cry. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. And she smiled. Not a smirk. Not a taunt. A soft, knowing smile like I'd finally caught up to the place she'd been living for months. Then she walked away again, back upstairs. And I realized the whole time I thought I was losing my wife. I'd been a pawn in something she never considered love in the first place. And it wasn't over. Because the next day, someone else showed up at my door. And he knew everything. He didn't knock like someone unsure of their place. He knocked like someone who already owned the door. For solid thuds, evenly spaced, like a rhythm meant to wake the dead. I was still sitting on the floor of the office, her folder open across my legs, when I heard it. My stomach turned instantly. My first instinct was to ignore it, pretend I wasn't home. But something told me that whoever was on the other side wasn't the kind of person who left without getting what they came for. I opened the door halfway. He was in his late 40s, pressed jeans, a leather jacket that looked more functional than fashionable, and eyes that scanned me like a scanner at airport security. Not angry. Not polite. Just assessing. "You're Lowell," he said. Not a question. I nodded. He looked over my shoulder, saw the inside of the house, then looked back at me. "We should talk." I should have closed the door. I should have asked who he was. I should have done anything but step aside and let him in. But I didn't. Because for some reason I still don't understand, part of me wanted to know what he had to say. He walked in like he'd been there before. Looked at the kitchen, the couch, the hallway. Finally, he turned and said, "She told you, right?" I just stared. "Talia," he clarified. "She told you about the fund. Ivory. The transfer." "I found the folder," I said, barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly, as if I just confirmed a theory he'd been sitting on for months. "Then we're on a tight clock. And you're already part of it whether you want to be or not." He sat down in the armchair across from the couch and leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Listen, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to clean up what she started. And more importantly, what she didn't finish." His name was Marcus. He claimed to be a compliance fixer, whatever that meant, working in the gray zone between finance and law enforcement. Not FBI. Not a lawyer. Something murkier. According to him, the so-called Clear Path Initiatives wasn't a charity, it was a front. A rotating series of shell accounts that had been used to hide assets for people on the verge of divorce, lawsuits, even international audits. The idea was to move chunks of money quietly, under the radar, and out of marital reach. The trust Talia had created, in both my name and Ivory's, was only one of many Marcus had uncovered. "She used your name," he said. "She needed someone clean, someone believable, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions." That hit me harder than I expected. Because it was true. I'd been the perfect idiot. Predictable. Passive. Harmless. "She didn't just betray you emotionally," he continued. "She leveraged you financially. You were the firewall." I asked him why he was telling me all this. "Why come now?" He paused, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin envelope. Inside was a second receipt, this one for a transfer into the Clear Path Trust. And this time, the sender wasn't Talia. It was me. My name. My old signature. From 4 years ago. Except I never signed that document. I knew I hadn't. I never even saw it. "She forged it," I said. He gave a slow nod. "And now she's planning to liquidate the trust, claim you signed off, and walk away with everything. Once the disbursement clears, she vanishes." I leaned back against the couch. My heart was racing, but my limbs felt heavy, like my body had given up trying to fight gravity. "So what now?" Marcus stood up. "Now? You have two options. Play dead, and watch her take the last pieces of your life. Or," he trailed off, walked over to the desk, picked up the manila folder. "Or you help me expose what she's been doing. Not just to you. To others. You're not the first name she's used. And you won't be the last." I should have said no. I should have told him to get out, that I wasn't built for this, that I'm not a whistleblower. I'm just a man who wanted to fix a doorknob and save a marriage. But instead, I looked at that receipt with my forged signature, and something inside me shifted. Not out of vengeance. Not even justice. Just a need, a quiet, pathetic need to matter. To prove that I wasn't as invisible as she'd made me feel. So I said yes. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that one word, that tiny, broken yes, would drag me into something far bigger than betrayal. Because once Marcus and I started pulling at the seams of her web, we found something neither of us was ready for. Marcus had left me with a burner phone and a set of instructions that felt less like a plan and more like a dare. Track her next move, don't spook her, and above all, pretend like nothing's changed. I agreed, mostly because I was too exhausted to argue. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't cut out for this. I'm not some savvy spy or emotionally bulletproof chess player. I'm the kind of guy who folds laundry immediately after the dryer buzzes. The kind of man who apologizes when someone bumps into him. But I was too far in now. And worse, I'd finally admitted something I'd spent years denying. Talia never loved me. Not the way I thought she did. She loved the idea of me. The convenience. The quiet man who didn't ask too many questions. The man who'd never threaten her control. She used my presence the same way someone props up a door with a chair, not for support, but as a stopgap. And I'd been that chair for nearly 2 decades. The next morning, I did what Marcus told me. I acted normal. I made coffee. I asked if she needed anything dry cleaned. She looked at me sideways, like she was trying to figure out if I'd cracked. But then she smiled. Not the warm kind, not even the mocking kind. A calculating smile, like she'd just watched her latest trap snap shut. "You're being sweet," she said. I shrugged. Trying. We sat at the table like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't used my identity to smuggle money into a fabricated trust account. Like she hadn't left receipts in drawers that screamed fraud in bold lettering. Like she hadn't just told me, point blank, that I wasn't meant to discover any of it. Then she dropped something new. "I'm going away next weekend," she said, sipping her coffee like she wasn't detonating a bomb in the middle of our fake domestic scene. "Business trip. Quick conference." "Where to?" "Chicago. Just for 2 nights." I nodded, careful to keep my eyes on my mug. What she didn't know, or maybe what she did know and didn't care I'd figure out, was that Ivory was already there. According to Marcus, she'd been setting up temporary accounts and company names from a downtown co-working space that operated under cash-only rental terms. No paper trail. No questions asked. Talia wasn't going to a conference. She was going to vanish. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat in the guest room, the same one where she used to take her phone calls, where I'd once stood outside and heard her laugh about how harmless I was, and I did something I hadn't done in years. I cried. Not loud, not ugly, just a slow, draining ache that leaked out through my eyes like pressure from a cracked pipe. I wasn't just mourning the marriage. I was mourning the version of myself I used to be, the one who thought love was enough, the one who thought loyalty earned loyalty, the one who believed, with every bone in his body, that he was lucky to have her. When the tears stopped, I opened the burner phone. There was one new message from Marcus. "Look in the safe." I froze. We had a small wall safe in the closet. Talia used to joke it was where we kept our emergency chocolate and our birth certificates. She'd changed the combination a few years back. Said she forgot the new one. I believed her. Of course I did. But now, everything felt different. I tiptoed back upstairs, careful not to wake her, and opened the closet door. I stared at the keypad like it might bite me. I tried the last combination I remembered, her birthday and mine. It didn't work. I tried our anniversary. No luck. Then I tried his birthday. Not mine. Hers and his. The man from the phone call. The voice I recognized. Her friend. Click. The safe popped open. Inside, there was no chocolate. No passports. No sentimental keepsakes. Just a burner phone identical to the one Marcus had given me. A second manila folder. A stack of sealed envelopes. And a single flash drive with a sticker on it that read, "Fail safe." I took everything. Not because I knew what to do with it. I didn't. But because I suddenly understood that she had been ready for every outcome. Every possible reaction. If I had screamed and left, she had a plan. If I had confronted her, she had a lie. If I stayed, like she knew I would, she had a script for that too. But now I had her playbook. The next day, I met Marcus in the back of a diner. I handed him the contents of the safe. He didn't say a word for a long time. Then he looked at me and asked the one question I hadn't been brave enough to answer. "How long do you think she's been preparing to walk away from you?" And I didn't have to think hard, because the truth was, she probably never walked toward me in the first place. I waited until the middle of the night to open the file. Marcus had offered to look through everything himself, but I said no. Not because I didn't trust him, I just needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to know what had lived in that safe, hidden 5 feet from where I slept for years. What had been so important to her that it earned a label like "Fail Safe"? The flash drive had one folder. Inside it, 3 video files, a password-protected spreadsheet, and a subfolder called Legal. I clicked the first video. The screen was grainy, the lighting poor. It had been filmed in our guest room, the same room where she'd laughed on the phone about how clueless I was. I could tell by the angle that she'd propped the phone against a stack of books. She sat on the edge of the bed in a silk robe I'd never seen before, legs crossed, holding a glass of wine. She was speaking to someone off camera, but smiling directly into the lens. "This is in case he ever figures it out," she said, voice light, like she was reading a bedtime story. "Lowell, if you're watching this, hi. You weren't supposed to." She took a sip of wine. "You were supposed to stay quiet. Be small. That's what made you useful. You know that, right? You were the safest bet. All heart, no spine." I leaned forward. She laughed, soft, almost sympathetic. "You were never the problem. That's the sad part. You were just convenient. A place to store my life until I was ready to move it somewhere better." I paused the video. My hands were shaking again. I hadn't realized I was gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles were white. I hit play. "You were loyal, I'll give you that," she said. "But loyalty without power is just noise." She turned, looked off camera again. "Should I say the line?" she asked someone. His voice said, "Yeah. Say it." She smiled. "I never married him because I loved him. I married him because he'd never leave. And if he ever tried," she raised her glass, "I'd already be gone." That was the end of the first video. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the screen while a quiet, hollow pressure pushed in behind my ribs. She wasn't trying to cover her tracks. She had recorded evidence of her intent to manipulate me, as if she knew, deep down, that someday she'd need to explain it to someone. Maybe a lawyer. Maybe a bank officer. Maybe me. The second video was shorter. Just 23 seconds. No speaking. It was security footage or a hidden cam of her standing in a hotel lobby. She wasn't alone. She was standing next to a man in a suit. He had his hand on the small of her back. She leaned in, whispered something in his ear. He laughed. Then he handed her a folder and kissed her, not like someone in a new fling, but like someone who'd known her for years. The timestamp was from 5 months before our anniversary. I closed the file and just sat in the dark. The more I tried to retrace the timeline, the more I realized how far back this went. Before the phone call, before the toothbrush, before I even noticed anything. This wasn't a spontaneous affair. This was a long con. The third video broke me. It was a recording of a conversation between her and Ivory, apparently from a car. You could hear the engine humming. Talia's voice was calm, but sharper than I'd ever heard it. "I don't need to drag him through a divorce. That's messy," she said. "He doesn't have fight in him. I can just fade out. Transfer what I need. Make it look like a separation. Let him sulk. He'll never chase. He'll grieve quietly, and that's it." Ivory laughed. "That's cold." "It's practical," she replied. And that was the word that stayed with me. Practical. To her, I was a practical solution to a temporary problem. I wasn't her partner. I wasn't her home. I was a placeholder, and worse, a disposable one. I sent Marcus the files that night. No message. No commentary. Just a silent handoff of the proof. 10 minutes later, he called. "This is more than I thought," he said quietly. "She didn't just commit fraud. She staged it, documented it, bragged about it. This isn't a leak. This is a confession. What do we do now?" I asked. He hesitated. "That depends on you." I thought about that for a long time, because up until that moment, I'd always let others decide for me. What I ate, where we lived, how I reacted. Even now, part of me wanted to be told what to do, as if someone else could save me from the responsibility of fighting back. But that version of me was gone. So I made the call. "If we do this, we go all the way," I said. "She doesn't get to vanish. Not this time." And Marcus gave a slow nod. "Then you're going to need to disappear first." I left on a Wednesday morning. Not with a suitcase or a dramatic goodbye, just a slim envelope on the dresser with 2 things inside, a key to the safe she thought I never opened, and a handwritten note that said, "You almost had me." She wouldn't read it right away. She was too busy boarding her flight to Chicago, where Ivory was already waiting with a briefcase full of fake contracts and a lawyer on standby to finalize the liquidation of the trust. What she didn't know, and what made every quiet moment of my suffering suddenly worth it, was that we'd already flipped the ledger. Marcus had worked fast. The videos, the forged signature, the flash drive, it was more than enough to freeze the accounts and trigger a fraud investigation. Every transfer she'd made in the past 3 years had been flagged. The trust was under review. The bank was already preparing a statement. By the time she landed in Chicago, she'd walk into an empty meeting room, with 2 very different people waiting for her. I didn't want revenge. Not really. I didn't want to ruin her life. I just wanted mine back. And I finally got it. I changed my phone number, shut down the joint account, took back the title on the house, thanks to the forged authorization we found in her safe, which voided her claim to anything jointly owned. She didn't fight it. Once she realized how deep the documentation went, how thoroughly she'd incriminated herself, she went silent. The last thing I ever received from her was a single-line email. "You surprised me." That was it. No apology. No denial. No defense. Just a sentence that felt like an echo from the life I used to live, where her approval meant everything, even if it came dressed in cruelty. But I didn't reply. Because for the first time in years, I didn't need her to see me. I saw myself. A few months later, the investigation closed. No charges for me. No debt. And by some miracle of quiet justice, I got to keep the house, the one she thought I was too weak to walk away from. But I didn't go back to living in it the same way. I repainted the walls, donated every item she ever touched to charity, tore out the closet where the safe had been. And, yes, I finally fixed the doorknob in the laundry room, not because it mattered anymore, but because I wanted to. People ask me if I'm dating again, if I've healed, if I'm bitter. I tell them this. I'm learning how to be alone without feeling empty. And that's harder than anyone tells you. But I'm getting there. I started volunteering with a local fraud recovery group, the kind of place where people whisper their stories like confessions and wait to be told they're not crazy. I listen. Sometimes I talk. Sometimes I just sit next to them and nod, because I know that look, the disbelief, the shame, the self-blame. I know how long it takes to unlearn the idea that being quiet keeps you safe. It doesn't. Being quiet only protects the people who hope you stay silent. So I stopped. I stopped shrinking. I stopped excusing. I stopped believing that loving someone meant losing myself. Talia wanted a ghost of a man, but I turned out to be something else entirely. Not her victim, not her project, not her pawn. Just me. Lowell standing, breathing, whole, and finally, free.